Let me start this story where it really, truly broke. The moment that defined the entire messy saga. Forget the quiet arguments in our condo, or the gnawing feeling in my gut for months. This was the crescendo. I was standing in the middle of our corporate boardroom, the kind with the 40-foot mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, and the silence, man, the silence was deafening. I had just plugged my phone into the main presentation screen, the massive one usually reserved for quarterly earnings charts and those excruciatingly boring strategic pivot slides. My wife, Clara, was sitting 2 seats away from me, her face pale, eyes wide, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. 40 of the company's highest-paid executives, including the CEO, the CFO, and basically everyone whose opinion mattered to our careers, were all frozen in place. They'd been laughing a second ago, just before I made my move. See, I had just watched Clara, for the 10th time that morning, subtly pull her phone into her lap and start furiously texting. And who was she texting? The guy I'd been paranoid about. The coworker, Leo. I'd seen the name flash across the top of her screen as she quickly tried to minimize the message. It was a familiar move, a little too quick, a little too practiced. And that little movement was the last straw for me. The meeting had been underway for about an hour. It was one of those mandatory, all-hands-on-deck corporate summits, the kind where you're supposed to feel energized about the future, but mainly just feel tired and slightly hungry. I was Brooke, an associate director in M&A. Clara was a senior manager in marketing. We were the corporate power couple, the ones everyone whispered about, the ones who had it all. The perfect life, the perfect jobs, the perfect penthouse apartment. That perfect image, I realized, was about to shatter like a dropped crystal vase, and I was holding the hammer. She had laughed, right? That's what stuck in my head. A few weeks prior, when I'd first raised my concerns about how often she and Leo were working late, how he always seemed to be the first one to comment on her personal social media posts, and how she suddenly became secretive with her phone, she just giggled. A dismissive, slightly patronizing sound. "Oh, Brooke," she'd said, "you're being so dramatic. Honestly, you need to stop being so paranoid. He's just a friendly coworker. We're working on the X project, it's intense." That word, paranoid, had stung me deep. It wasn't just a label, it was a total invalidation of my feelings, a way to dismiss my intuition without having to offer a real explanation. It made me feel small, ridiculous, and worst of all, wrong. But I wasn't wrong. I was just giving her the benefit of the doubt that her laughter demanded. Right then, in that moment of watching her text, I realized I had all the proof I needed on my phone. Weeks ago, driven by that paranoid feeling, I'd done something I'm still not proud of, something desperate. I'd installed a monitoring app on her secondary work phone. Not to spy on every little thing, but to back up my sanity, to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. And what did I find? A folder full of voice messages, hundreds of them, between her and Leo, tucked away on a private messenger app she thought I didn't know about. My blood started to pound, but strangely, my movements were calm, almost clinical. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my personal phone. The whole room was focused on the VP of sales, a booming, red-faced guy named Greg who was trying to get us all excited about a 1% market share increase. Nobody was watching me. I discreetly reached into my briefcase, pulled out the HDMI adapter, the universal translator for the corporate world, and plugged it into the bottom of my phone. Then, I leaned down to the central conference table console, where all the wires lived, and unplugged Greg's laptop cable. He paused mid-sentence, looking annoyed as his presentation vanished and the screen went blue. "Technical difficulties, folks. Give me a sec," he grumbled, fiddling with the wires. "I got it, Greg," I said, my voice calm, flat, and carrying just enough authority to make him back off. My sudden interruption made everyone finally look at me. Clara's head snapped up. She saw the adapter in my hand, saw the USB-C end heading for the console, and her eyes went from annoyed to horrified in less than a second. I plugged my phone in. The main presentation screen immediately mirrored my display. For a brief, horrible second, the whole room saw my home screen wallpaper, a slightly blurry picture of Clara and me on our honeymoon in Santorini, laughing, a memory that felt like a lifetime ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I saw Clara mouth the word no. Before anyone could object, before Greg could snatch the cable, I navigated to the voice messages folder. I selected the first one, the one that had made me sick the first time I heard it, and hit play. The volume was set to max. For anyone watching this right now, I have a quick question. Where in the world are you watching this story? Drop a comment below with your city and country. Let me know who is following along with this wild mess. The speakers, the same ones that usually blast motivational pump-up music during team building, suddenly boomed Leo's voice, thick and clearly recorded late at night. I just keep thinking about what you wore to the client dinner. That little black dress. Seriously, Clara, it's making it really hard to focus on this merger presentation. I need to see you tomorrow. Maybe we can skip the strategy meeting. And that's when the silence came. Not a momentary pause, but the heavy, crushing, total absence of sound that you could literally feel pressing on your chest. 40 people, some of the most powerful people in the industry, were staring at the screen, then at Clara, then at me. Clara's face was white, her mouth open, the laughter gone forever. I stood there, my hand still resting on the phone, the digital playback bar glowing green against the corporate blue backdrop. I hadn't even looked at my wife. My gaze was locked on the screen, on the proof, the undeniable truth that invalidated every single lie she had ever told me. Paranoid, huh? We were just getting started. I had 11 more sections of pure, unadulterated public exposure ready to go. The meeting was definitely pivoting now. The echoes of Leo's voice message, the one about the little black dress and skipping strategy meetings, died out, leaving a corporate vacuum. It was the kind of silence where you could hear the whir of the projector fan and the distant city traffic. But that was just the powerful hook. Now I had to rewind and show you how we got here, how Brooke and Clara, the corporate golden couple, ended up in this spectacular, humiliating public breakdown. See, the setting is crucial here. This wasn't just any company, it was Global Synergy Corp., a place where appearances were currency. We weren't just employees, we were brands. Clara and I had met there 5 years ago. I was grinding away in an analyst role, and she was a rising star in her first management track position. Our connection was instant, a shared ambition, a love for high-stakes deal-making, and a mutual understanding of the relentless pressure cooker environment. We got married 2 years later in a ceremony that looked straight out of a glossy magazine, complete with a 6-figure home loan and 2 matching luxury SUVs. We lived in the fast lane, powered by high salaries and the adrenaline of closing big deals. Our life, on paper, was flawless. We had the penthouse on the 40th floor, the views, the expensive espresso machine, and the kind of networking calendar that would make your head spin. But the reality was, our life was run by the corporate clock. Our conversations were usually about KPIs, quarterly projections, and who was getting promoted. We weren't a couple, we were an alliance, a 2-person high-performance team dedicated to climbing the corporate ladder. And that's where the stress really started to eat away at us. I'm Brooke. I'm the type of guy who sweats the details. I plan everything, the budget, the vacation itinerary, even the weekly grocery list. Clara, though brilliant, was more chaotic, more fly by the seat of your pants. She thrived on last-minute pressure. And lately, that chaos seemed to manifest mostly in her work schedule. I have to work late on the X project, became her daily mantra. It was always X project this, X project that. She'd come home past 9, sometimes closer to 10, smelling faintly of the expensive office cafeteria coffee and the vague metallic scent of late-night stress. I'd try to connect, to ask about her day, but she'd be glued to her secondary work phone, which she claimed was essential for confidential communication. She started taking calls in the spare bedroom and sending texts with her phone angled away from me. I remember one specific Friday night. We had planned a date night, a rare, dedicated few hours where we weren't allowed to discuss work. I bought her favorite wine and spent an hour trying to cook a complicated French recipe. She walked in at 8:30 p.m., sighed dramatically, and threw her briefcase onto the sofa. "I can't believe I missed the deadline on the stakeholder analysis," she muttered, not even looking at me. "Hey, don't worry about it," I said, trying to be the supportive husband. "The Boeuf Bourguignon is almost ready. Want a glass of wine?" She shook her head. "No. I need to finish this. Leo needs me to send him the final data tonight so he can build the presentation for Monday. It's really critical, Brooke." And there he was. Leo. Always Leo. The coworker she was suddenly spending more time with than her own husband. I'd never had a reason to dislike the guy, but his name started to feel like a pebble in my shoe, Small, irritating, and impossible to ignore. He was the young, charismatic finance guy everyone loved, the one who always knew the right joke and wore his tailored suits just a little too well. He was her counterpart on the X project, a massive, multi-departmental undertaking. "Clara," I said, putting the spoon down on the counter a little too hard. "It's Friday night. Can't it wait until Monday morning?" She finally looked up, her expression a mix of exhaustion and annoyance. "No, Brooke. It can't. This is global synergy. We don't work 9 to 5. You know that. Why are you always making a big deal out of my workload? It's not fair." That night, she spent 2 hours tapping away on her phone, replying to Leo, while the expensive French dinner got cold. I ate alone, the silence in the penthouse amplified by the sound of her frantic, tiny key taps. It wasn't just the late nights, it was the shift in her personality. She became defensive, withdrawn, and focused only on the bubble of the X project. Our little relatable moments, the inside jokes, the way we'd tease each other about our morning routine, they all dried up. We were 2 roommates sharing an address, not 2 people building a life. What I didn't realize then was that her commitment wasn't just professional. It had crossed a very personal boundary. The subtle clues, the phone secrecy, the defensiveness, they were the early warning signs, and I was trying to rationalize them with corporate jargon. I kept telling myself, she's stressed. It's the X project. This is just a unique, high-pressure moment. I used the corporate environment as a shield against the truth, because the truth, that my perfect life was fraying, was too scary to face. The office, the very place that brought us together and defined our success, was now the catalyst for our downfall. The intense pressure, the requirement to look perfect, the constant striving, it had created the perfect environment for a secret to grow. Our backstory wasn't a romance. It was a merger that was heading for hostile dissolution. The next step, the very first time I confronted her about Leo, was the moment she deployed the ultimate defense mechanism, calling me paranoid, the word that would eventually ignite the bomb I just set off in the boardroom. The first time I really put my foot down, the moment I stopped accepting the X project stress excuse, was about 4 weeks before the boardroom meeting. It was a Saturday morning, a beautiful, rare day off. I woke up around 7 a.m., feeling optimistic. I was going to make pancakes. Maybe we'd finally take that hike we'd been talking about. But I found Clara already sitting in the kitchen island, not eating or reading, but already deep into her secondary phone. "Morning," I said, leaning in to give her a kiss. She offered her cheek without looking up. "Morning, Brooke." "Sure, just a sec. Leo just sent a massive data dump. I need to look at this before he calls." The name just dropped into the otherwise peaceful morning like a stone in a pond. I didn't say anything immediately. I started mixing the pancake batter, trying to control the sudden tightness in my chest. I watched her fingers fly across the screen, a small, secretive smile playing on her lips, the same smile she used to give me when we were sharing an inside joke. Except now, the joke was with him. After about 20 minutes of this strange silence, where I was actively not flipping pancakes and she was actively not acknowledging my existence, I put the bowl down. "We need to talk about Leo," I said, my voice measured. I tried to sound reasonable, not accusatory. I really did. She finally looked up, her expression instantly defensive. The small smile vanished, replaced by a mask of impatience. "Oh God, here we go. What about him, Brooke?" "It's not, what about him, Clara. It's about us. This X project has consumed you, and specifically, he has consumed your time. I know you're busy, but the sheer volume of contact, the late nights, the weekend texts, the way you clam up every time I walk into the room when you're on your phone, it's too much. It feels secretive." I tried to keep my focus on the feeling, on the behavior, hoping she'd finally open up. Instead, she scoffed. That was the sound that really set me off. The scoff. Secretive. "Brooke, we are dealing with a multi-million-dollar merger. There are NDAs, there's proprietary data. We have to communicate constantly. If I was acting like this with the CEO, would you complain?" she challenged. "If you were giggling at the CEO's texts on a Saturday morning, yes, I probably would." I shot back, finally letting some of the frustration bleed through. Her eyes narrowed. "I was not giggling. I was reacting to a graph he sent. You are twisting this, Brooke. Honestly, this is bordering on ridiculous. Leo is my professional partner on this project. Nothing more. We have a good working relationship, and you're trying to ruin it because you can't handle me having a successful career where I interact with other men. That last part, the part about me being insecure about her success, was a low blow. We had always supported each other. That was a central pillar of our alliance. To turn my concern into a flaw in my character was a brilliant, devastating tactic. Then she pulled out the nuclear option, the word that would replay in my head every time I saw her phone light up: "You are being paranoid. There is literally nothing going on, and you are manufacturing drama because you're bored. You need to trust me. Or maybe you need to look at why you're so insecure about our marriage." The way she delivered that, with that cool, dismissive tone, it didn't just shut down the conversation, it flipped the script. Suddenly, I was the problem. I was the one with the trust issues. I was the one who needed to look inward. And because I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous, controlling husband, I backed down. I retreated, licking my wounds. "Okay," I muttered, turning back to the sink. "Fine. I'll try to trust you." But I couldn't. Not anymore. The feeling of being labeled paranoid was an insult to my intelligence. I prided myself on my intuition, especially in the corporate world. I could spot a fraudulent balance sheet from a mile away. Was my emotional life any different? I didn't believe her for a second, but I didn't have proof. All I had was a powerful gut feeling and a lot of deflection. That confrontation marked a turning point. Before then, I was hoping for clarity. After, I decided I needed certainty. I needed something tangible to counteract the emotional manipulation. That's what drove me to that desperate, unethical act, installing the monitoring software on her work phone. I told myself it wasn't spying, it was self-preservation. It was proving my sanity. I wasn't looking for proof of infidelity, I told myself. I was just looking for proof I wasn't crazy, proof that my intuition, the thing that made me successful at my job, wasn't betraying me in my life. I found the voice messages about a week later. Dozens of them. Not just professional exchanges, but casual, intimate banter. Pet names. Late-night check-ins that had nothing to do with market data. The final confirmation, the one that made my stomach drop and confirmed everything she had denied, was the message I just played for the entire boardroom. The one about the little black dress. That voice message, along with the others, had been sitting on my phone for 2 weeks, a ticking time bomb, waiting for the perfect, most devastating moment to detonate. And that moment, I realized, was going to be at the corporate summit. I wouldn't just be proving her wrong, I'd be erasing the word paranoid from my vocabulary in front of everyone who ever mattered to our careers. The setting for this public execution, this theatrical breakdown of my marriage, was the corporate summit. It wasn't just any meeting, it was the quarterly all-hands strategy review for the entire executive leadership team. This was the big leagues, the room where multi-million-dollar decisions were rubber-stamped and careers were made or broken. If you wanted to make a statement, and trust me, I wanted to make the loudest statement possible, this was the venue. The meeting was held in the largest boardroom on the 55th floor, the A-suite, we called it. The atmosphere was always thick with a mix of stale air conditioning, expensive cologne, and high-octane ambition. 40 people were present, representing every major department: sales, finance, legal, M&A, my team, and marketing, Clara's team. Everyone was dressed in their power uniforms, sharp suits, designer dresses, and shoes that cost more than my first car. These were the people who decided who got the bonuses, who got the promotions, and who got quietly ushered out the door. My boss, the head of M&A, was there. Clara's boss, the VP of marketing, was there. Even the CEO, Mr. Henderson, was at the head of the long mahogany table, nursing a bottle of imported mineral water. I had arrived early, which was unusual for me, trying to maintain a veneer of corporate composure. I needed to scope out the room and, more importantly, the technical setup. The setup in the A-suite was notoriously complicated. A central console with hidden ports and a universal projector that needed a specific adapter to link to a laptop, or in my case, a phone. I made a mental note of where the cables were, knowing that the few seconds it would take to switch the connection would be my window of opportunity. Clara walked in about 10 minutes later, breezy and composed. She was wearing a tailored gray pantsuit, the kind that screamed senior management, and she looked stunning, professional, and utterly disconnected from me. She gave me a quick, practiced peck on the cheek. "Hey, Brooke. Didn't know you were sitting here," she said, her tone utterly flat. Our seating arrangement was a small, cruel twist of fate. The seating chart was determined by department, and since M&A and marketing were next to each other on the agenda, we were placed just 2 seats apart. I was sitting beside my direct boss, and Clara was 2 seats down on the other side, beside the VP of Sales, Greg, the guy whose presentation I would eventually interrupt in Section 1. This proximity meant that she was close enough for me to see the little flash of light, the quick movement of her thumb, the minute change in her expression when she received a text. It also meant I was physically close enough to the central console to execute my plan. As the meeting started, the usual corporate theater unfolded. There were endless slides filled with dense data, forced smiles, and the ritualistic nodding of heads. I was technically listening to the conversation about Q2 projections, but honestly, my focus was entirely on Clara. The gnawing paranoia from our argument, the one she had dismissed, had morphed into a cold, hard certainty. I was waiting for the inevitable, for the small, relatable moment that would confirm my worst suspicions. And sure enough, about 45 minutes in, while the legal team was droning on about regulatory compliance, it happened. The meeting was entering that lull, everyone was getting sleepy, the coffee had worn off. Clara shifted in her chair, and I saw her hand dip below the table. She pulled out her work phone, the one with the monitoring app, and positioned it strategically on her lap, shielded by the edge of the mahogany table. She didn't text immediately. She just held it there, looking up periodically at the speaker to maintain the illusion of engagement. Then, the phone vibrated, lighting up the underside of the table. I saw her eyes flick down, and that little secretive smile, the one I'd seen that Saturday morning, crept across her face. Her thumb flew across the screen, typing out a response with a speed and intensity that was completely disproportionate to any work-related communication. No one types that fast about regulatory compliance. Her focus was absolute. She was locked into that conversation, oblivious to the high-stakes meeting happening around her. It was a complete betrayal of the professional environment, let alone our marriage. Then, the final, undeniable proof arrived. A new message popped up at the top of her screen, right before she could minimize it. It was a little white banner notification. And there, big as day, were the first few words and the sender's name, "Leo, can't wait for tonight." That was it. That was the moment. She caught my eye then, realizing I was staring not at her, but at the reflection of the phone screen on the polished table. For a split second, the smile vanished, and a flicker of naked fear crossed her face. She quickly locked the phone and slid it back into her purse, attempting to pretend the whole incident never happened. But it was too late. The sight of Leo's name and that suggestive text was the key turning point. The layered conflict I had been experiencing, the conflict between my job, my marriage, and my sanity, snapped into a single, devastating path. My previous internal debate about whether I was being paranoid was settled. I wasn't paranoid, I was right. And now, I had to act. I looked around the room. All the ambition, the suits, the power plays, it all felt nauseatingly fake. We built our lives on this corporate pretense, and Clara was destroying it with a secret text message. I felt a cold, surgical calm wash over me. I reached into my briefcase, felt the hard edge of the HDMI adapter, and knew exactly what I had to do. The silence I just experienced in Section 1 was less than a minute away. The time for internal debate was over. The time for irreversible action had begun. I'm telling you, seeing that text, "Leo, can't wait for tonight," was like a circuit breaker finally tripping. It was the visual evidence, the smoking gun, and the final nail in the coffin of my denial. Up until that point, even with the voice messages I had secretly downloaded, a tiny, desperate part of me still held onto her dismissive label, paranoid. Maybe the messages were old. Maybe they were taken out of context. Maybe she was just being flirty in an email with an emoji. But a specific, suggestive text about tonight during a high-stakes corporate meeting? No. That wasn't professionalism. That was a plan. I didn't react physically. I didn't shout, or stand up, or slam my fist on the polished mahogany table. I just stared, letting the cold reality sink in. The VP of Legal was still talking about Q3 compliance metrics. The sunlight was pouring through the massive windows, making the dust motes dance. Everything felt hyper-real, yet incredibly distant. My focus was laser-locked on the spot where the text had appeared, and on Clara's quick, fearful attempt to hide the phone. The thing about our corporate culture, the one Clara and I had built our lives around, is that it demands absolute, unwavering professionalism. Any lapse is scrutinized, judged, and remembered. She was risking her standing, her reputation, and her entire career for a discreet conversation with a coworker. That level of risk meant the reward, or the connection, was far greater than a mere fling. It implied depth, commitment, and a complete dismissal of the life we shared. I knew exactly what that secretive texting meant. The quick downward glance, the momentary lapse in her otherwise perfect poker face, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear as she typed, these were all tells. In the corporate world, you learn to read those little, subtle signals. If a client fidgets with their pen, they're ready to close. If a competitor avoids eye contact, they're holding back information. And if your wife suddenly becomes a master of discreet texting, something major is being hidden. This wasn't just about cheating, this was about the arrogance of secrecy. She had dismissed my intuition, my feelings, and my concerns, labeling them as flaws in my character, all while she had the truth tucked into her lap. She had laughed when I said I knew, or rather, when I said I suspected. Now, she was finding out that my suspicion wasn't unfounded. It was merely delayed. I spent the next 10 minutes, while the legal VP wrapped up, calmly executing the mental checklist I hadn't realized I was making. 1. Access. Was my phone charged? Yes. Thank God for pre-meeting charging habits. 2. Proof. Were the voice messages easily accessible? Yes, they were bookmarked in my private folder. 3. Mechanism. Did I have the right adapter? Yes, the USB-C to HDMI was sitting right in my briefcase. 4. Opportunity. When was the best time? Not during a silence, but during a transition, when the focus shifts from one speaker to the next. The glancing texting discovery didn't just solidify the conflict, it injected an element of profound moral dilemma and rising tension. My career was at a critical juncture. The next 6 months were supposed to be my run-up to a director role. Publicly humiliating my wife, who was also a high-ranking employee, was a career-ending move. I would be signing my professional death warrant. I would be walking away from the stability, the money, and the power that defined my identity. But the alternative? Sitting there, nodding politely through the next 2 hours, then going home to our cold, beautiful apartment, knowing she was texting him plans for tonight? Knowing that I would have to endure the silent charade, the casual lies, and the dismissive laughter for potentially months or years. The thought was soul-crushing. It felt like choking on sand. The cost of silence suddenly outweighed the cost of the explosion. I looked at the CEO, Mr. Henderson, a man I respected, who was currently discussing the importance of corporate integrity. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. What was integrity? Was it preserving the illusion of a successful career and marriage, or was it exposing a fundamental, dishonest rot at the core of my life, regardless of the consequences? I made my decision then, the kind of decision you can never take back. I reached down, my hand brushing against the cool leather of my briefcase. I had the means, I had the motive, and now I had the perfect public stage. The internal conflict ceased, replaced by a strange, exhilarating clarity. I wasn't doing this out of jealousy. I was doing this to reclaim my sanity and prove the truth she had worked so hard to deny. I was going to use the very tools of our shared success, the technology, the boardroom, the high-powered audience, as the instruments of her defeat. The legal VP finally finished. And that concludes the compliance review. Up next, we have Greg from sales with Q3 performance. The focus shifted, the lights dimmed slightly for the presentation slides. Greg, the loud, red-faced VP, stepped up to the console, ready to plug in. This was it. The perfect window. My hand moved towards the adapter. The turning point was about to commence. I had been paranoid, but now I was a man with irrefutable proof, a microphone, and an audience of the 40 people who mattered most. Greg, the VP of sales, was standing at the console, fumbling with his laptop cable, ready to plug into the large projector screen. The room was buzzing with low-level chatter, the perfect cover for my plan. But in that moment, just before I made my move, a tidal wave of doubt crashed over me. This was the moral crossroads moment. It's easy to think of this as a simple revenge fantasy playing out, but I assure you, it was far more complex. I wasn't just contemplating exposing Clara, I was contemplating detonating my own life. Everything I had built, the six-figure salary, the reputation, the 5 years of brutal, non-stop work that had propelled me into the associate director role, it was all tied to the illusion of my stability. People in corporate environments don't promote loose cannons or people involved in messy public scandals. They promote the stable, the predictable, the ones who don't create waves. My internal monologue was a rapid-fire court case. Prosecutor, my gut, she lied to you. She called you paranoid. She's planning to see him tonight. You have the proof right here. You must expose the truth to reclaim your dignity. If you don't, you'll be living a lie, and that will destroy you slower, but more surely, than a public scene. Defense attorney, my career stop. Think about the CEO, Mr. Henderson, who is watching. Think about your bonus. Think about the director title you are weeks away from getting. If you do this, you'll be unemployable in this industry. You'll be labeled volatile. You will throw away a decade of financial security for 5 minutes of vengeance. I vividly remembered our expensive life, the mortgage, the matching cars, the future we'd planned. Was I willing to burn all that because of a fling? Maybe I could just confront her privately later, present the voice messages, and demand a quiet divorce. That was the mature, adult way, the way that preserved my professional life. But then I looked at Clara. She was sitting there, a picture of polished corporate perfection, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief that I hadn't acted yet, and lingering fear. She was already mentally calculating how to spin this, how to lie her way out of the text message I'd seen. She was relying on my professionalism, my need for success, to keep me silent. She assumed my ambition was greater than my anger. She was betting my career would silence my heart. And that's what sealed it. Her absolute certainty that I would choose money over truth, prestige over self-respect, was the deepest insult of all. I thought back to the conversation in Section 3, where she had weaponized my feelings against me. You need to trust me. Or maybe you need to look at why you're so insecure. That memory, the feeling of being gaslit and marginalized, was a far stronger motivator than any future bonus. The money would return, but my self-respect, once lost to silent compliance, would never come back. This wasn't just about Clara, it was about the layered conflict of the corporate facade itself. We were all sitting there, pretending to care deeply about a 1% market share increase, while I was dealing with a 100% collapse of my personal life. The entire environment was built on artifice, and I was about to introduce a massive dose of devastating reality. The secondary challenges were immediate. How would I execute this without being physically stopped? How could I make sure the audio played loud enough for everyone to hear? This required surgical precision, not a frantic outburst. I had to maintain the cold, surgical calm I'd felt in Section 5. I saw Greg finally bend down, his cable almost touching the input console. This was it. No more time for moral philosophy. I felt a weird sensation, not adrenaline, but a profound sense of release. The moral dilemma was resolved. My sanity and truth mattered more than the titles and the money. The sheer weight of the lie was too much to carry any longer. My hand reached out, not hesitating. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry. I was just focused on the goal. Certainty. I needed to transform the rising tension in the room, the collective corporate fatigue, into sudden, shocking horror. I pulled the HDMI adapter from my briefcase, discreetly tucking the cord against my leg. Greg was distracted, arguing with his assistant about a missing slide number. I leaned over, my body language suggesting I was just adjusting my chair or picking up a dropped pen. "Excuse me, Greg," I murmured. He barely glanced at me. In one smooth motion, I reached the console, pulled Greg's pre-existing, dangling cable completely out of the port, and firmly inserted my adapter's USB-C end into the console, followed by my phone's cable. The large screen at the front of the room, which had just been a blank blue, instantly flashed up with my phone's home screen, the Santorini honeymoon photo, the painful callback to the life we were supposed to have. Greg looked up, startled. "What the, Brooke, what are you doing?" I ignored him, my thumb already navigating through the menus. I found the file, the voice message from Leo, the one I had promised to play, and hit max volume on the side of my phone. Clara, who had been watching me with mounting panic, finally realized what was happening. Her face crumpled. She started to rise from her seat, her hand outstretched. "Brooke, don't. Please don't," she whispered, her voice cracking, but it was far too late. The high-powered speakers, designed for corporate presentations, began to blast the intimate, suggestive voice message into the horrified silence of the A-suite. My life, and hers, was now irrevocably tied to the volume and clarity of the corporate A/V system. The moment I unplugged Greg's cable and plugged in my own phone, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Greg's face, already red from his presentation enthusiasm, went purple with shock and annoyance. But my focus wasn't on him. It was on the large, mirrored screen showing my Santorini honeymoon photo, a final, painful visual reminder of the life that was now collapsing. Clara's panicked whisper of, "Brooke, don't. Please don't," was the only sound besides the whirring of the projector, a sound that quickly got drowned out. Before anyone, the CEO, Greg, or even Clara, could physically stop me, I found the voice message file on my screen and hit the play button. This wasn't just a decision, it was a physical commitment to the destruction of my old life, the ultimate turning point. The high-fidelity boardroom speakers, designed to perfectly amplify the CEO's gravitas, instead blasted Leo's intimate voice across the A-suite. "I just keep thinking about what you wore to the client dinner. That little black dress. Seriously, Clara, it's making it really hard to focus on this merger presentation. I need to see you tomorrow, maybe we can skip the strategy meeting." I had heard that message a dozen times in private, but hearing it boom in a room full of the most powerful people in my career was something else entirely. It was an assault on the senses, a brutal intrusion of the personal into the sacred professional space. The reaction was instantaneous and electric. The initial chaos subsided into a horrifying, collective freeze. 40 people, trained their whole careers to maintain composure under pressure, were absolutely paralyzed. I saw Mr. Henderson, the unflappable CEO, slowly remove his reading glasses and stare at the screen, then at Clara. Greg, the VP of Sales, looked like he'd swallowed his microphone. Clara, however, was no longer frozen. She launched herself out of her chair, a desperate animal movement. "Stop it, Brooke. Give me the phone," she hissed, trying to reach over the two executives seated between us. I held the phone firmly, my gaze locked on the screen, maintaining that strange, detached calm. "It's too late, Clara," I said, my voice low but carrying authority. "The truth doesn't stay hidden in this building." I immediately hit the play button on the next message, a shorter, more devastating reply from Clara herself. This was the one that proved the emotional investment, the one that proved she was an active participant in the betrayal I had detailed in Section 3. "I know, Leo. I miss you too. It's impossible to be here next to Brooke all day knowing how I felt last night. I'm sending you the draft document now, but let's just call it a distraction for now. Don't forget to delete these. See you later tonight, babe." The word babe echoed through the silent boardroom. It hung in the air, a neon sign of betrayal glowing over the mahogany table. If the first message was shocking, this one was catastrophic. It not only confirmed the affair but explicitly implicated the fact that she was sitting next to her husband, actively texting her lover, while using the professional work product, the draft document, as a cover. She was lying to me, but she was also compromising corporate integrity by using company devices and time for this private, illicit communication. The collective shock in the room intensified into cold disapproval. The executives weren't just witnessing a marriage dissolving. They were witnessing a monumental professional lapse and a potential HR nightmare unfolding live. These people understood the stakes. Reputations, careers, and the company's image were on the line. Clara stopped struggling. She stood there, halfway between her chair and mine, her chest heaving, her beautiful professional mask completely shattered. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked defeated, her secret ripped violently into the light. The laughter she had used to dismiss me, the "you're being paranoid" defense, was now her own personal guillotine. "Brooke, you cannot do this," she finally managed, her voice ragged and tight with shame. "This is insane. You're ruining everything. Your career, my career." "You ruined it, Clara," I interrupted, still calm, still focused on the phone. "You just didn't have the decency to admit it. You called me paranoid and let me doubt my own sanity for months while you planned to see him tonight," I said, delivering a callback to the text I'd seen in Section 5. "I'm just providing the evidence you demanded. I saw a woman from legal lean over and whisper frantically to the CEO. Mr. Henderson raised a hand, silencing the entire room, his face stern. The moment had transcended personal drama and had officially become a corporate crisis. I didn't need to play any more messages. The two I played had done the job. They had confirmed the emotional depth of the betrayal, and Clara's reaction had cemented the authenticity of the recordings. I slowly unplugged my phone, disconnecting it from the screen. The blue blankness returned, and with it, a jarring sense of reality. The show was over. The silence, which had been so crushing when it started, now felt heavy with judgment. This was the dramatic climax of the turning point and rising drama. The resolution would be swift and brutal, but I had made my statement. The high-fidelity speakers had gone silent, but the shockwave they created was still vibrating through the room. That second voice message, Clara's own voice calling him babe and admitting how hard it was to sit next to me, was the final, surgical blow. It wasn't just proof of the affair. It was proof of her deception in the very physical presence of her commitment. The entire room was locked in a tableau of disbelief. The silence that followed wasn't the annoyed pause from before. This was a dead silence, thick, suffocating, and loaded with judgment. You could literally hear the distant city hum coming from the soundproof windows. Everyone's gaze was fixed on Clara. She was still standing, her face blotchy, her composure completely gone. She was the star of the most humiliating presentation of her career. I placed my phone gently on the table. My own hands were steady, a surprising stillness that felt detached from the turmoil raging inside me. I was watching the scene unfold as if I were a spectator, not the primary actor. I saw the executives who had praised her work, who had collaborated with her, now looking at her with a mix of pity and professional distaste. In this high-stakes environment, being caught in a personal scandal was bad, but being caught actively compromising her focus and using corporate communication for it was unforgivable. Mr. Henderson, the CEO, finally broke the silence, his voice deep and cutting. "Clara," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. "Is this accurate? Are these voice messages authentic?" Clara was cornered. She could still try to lie, to claim it was an old joke or a prank, but she knew it was pointless. Her dramatic reaction, her attempt to lunge for my phone, had confirmed the authenticity better than any expert analysis could. She didn't answer Mr. Henderson. Instead, she turned her raw, tear-filled gaze back to me, the man she had called paranoid. "Brooke," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. How could you do this to me? To us? To everything we worked for?" I looked her dead in the eye, finally letting the cold, hard certainty replace the months of doubt. "I did this because you lied to me. You invalidated my feelings. You weaponized my trust against me. You didn't just break our marriage, Clara. You insulted my intelligence. I asked for the truth in private, and you gave me a dismissive laugh. You demanded proof, and here it is, delivered with maximum clarity." I gestured to the surrounding executives. I was told I was being paranoid. I had to prove my sanity in the most undeniable way possible. The only way to counter a public lie is with a public truth. The executives were murmuring now, low, shocked whispers filling the room. The head of HR, a rigid woman named Eleanor, stood up. "Mr. Henderson, I suggest we recess this meeting immediately. This is an internal matter that needs to be handled privately." She was trying to salvage the professionalism of the corporate summit, trying to put the genie back in the bottle. But I wasn't finished. I was in the middle of the rising drama, and I needed to complete the narrative. I looked at Greg, the VP of Sales, who was still standing by the console looking bewildered. "Greg, I apologize for interrupting your presentation. But your sales figures, while important, were secondary to the integrity of this room and the truth. You can continue later." Then I turned back to the room. I trust that the authenticity of these recordings is no longer in doubt. The personal and professional betrayal speaks for itself. I will be sending my formal resignation letter to HR before the end of the day. That announcement, my resignation, was another shockwave. It showed everyone that I understood the consequence of my actions. I wasn't trying to keep my job while humiliating my wife. I was walking away from the entire corrupt, compromised structure. I was choosing integrity over the corporate ladder that Clara and I had sacrificed everything for, including our marriage. Clara made one last, desperate attempt to reclaim control, not of the situation, but of her narrative. "This is completely unhinged. He's unstable, Mr. Henderson. He spied on me," she cried, pointing at me. "He broke the company's privacy policy." That was true. I had violated privacy policies. But I also had the truth. Mr. Henderson held up his hand again, silencing her. He didn't look at me or Clara. He looked at the vast skyline outside the window, a man processing a corporate disaster. "Eleanor, please escort Ms. Clara out of the room. We will continue this discussion in private." The fact that he addressed her as Ms. Clara, not by her first name, was the corporate equivalent of a death sentence. Clara, realizing that her professional life was now over, didn't fight Eleanor, who moved swiftly to her side. As they reached the door, she gave me one last look, a mixture of hate, shock, and profound failure. The silence in the room had done its job. It had judged her, condemned her, and professionally exiled her. I stood there, watching the door close, feeling the weight of the 40 stairs on my back. I had my truth, but I had paid the ultimate price for it. The dead silence. The first message section was over, replaced by the heavy anticipation of the fallout. Clara was gone. Escorted out by the head of HR, her exit as silent and devastating as the voice messages themselves. But the rising drama wasn't finished. Now, I had to deal with the fallout in the room, the 40 pairs of eyes that were currently trying to reconcile Brooke the high-potential associate director with Brooke the public disruptor. I was still standing by the console, facing the stunned audience. I could feel the CEO, Mr. Henderson, analyzing me, calculating the exact level of damage control required. The collective focus had shifted from Clara's betrayal to my extreme reaction. In the corporate hierarchy, personal drama is acceptable as long as it's contained. I had not contained it. I had amplified it to the max. But I wasn't done with the voice messages. I needed to solidify the truth, to make sure there was zero room for spin or doubt later. She had left the room with a potential argument that I was unstable and that the recordings were unhinged. I needed to play the one message that proved the sheer audacity of her deception, the message that was clearly recorded in our shared home. I picked up my phone again, ignoring the silent plea from the head of M&A, my own boss, who was shaking his head slightly, a gesture that clearly meant, "Don't do this, Brooke. Stop now." I navigated to the next recording and hit play. This message was a little different. It had a familiar background noise, the distinctive high-pitched whir of our expensive espresso machine that Clara always used at 6 a.m. This one was from Leo, sent around 6:15 a.m. on a Monday morning, a time Clara was usually rushing to get out the door. "Good morning, beautiful. I know you're sitting there, drinking your corporate fuel, probably next to your husband. But I just wanted to say, last night was incredible. Seriously, I can't stop thinking about the look on your face when you realized we were staying late again. You're worth every risk, babe. Now go crush that Q3 pitch, and I'll see you later for team building. Wink. Delete this immediately, okay?" The message was brief, but it was a gut punch. The background noise, the espresso machine, placed the conversation directly in our home, in the kitchen island where she sat, texting him while I was often making breakfast just feet away. The phrase, "your husband," was used as a deliberate punchline, a nod to the clandestine nature of their relationship. And the term team building was a corporate code word for their affair, a direct mockery of the very values of collaboration we were all supposed to embody. When the message ended, the silence that descended was even heavier than before. If the first two messages confirmed the affair, this one confirmed the deep-seated, calculated contempt she had for me and for the entire pretense of our life. It showed the executives that Clara wasn't just having a momentary lapse of judgment. She was operating with a sophisticated, cold-blooded level of deception that permeated her professional and personal life. The reaction wasn't shock this time. It was a cold, hard anger from the executive team. They didn't care about my marriage. They cared about the professional risk and the mocking use of corporate jargon like team building and Q3 pitch to cover up a personal indiscretion. That message was the final, devastating piece of evidence that ensured her career at Global Synergy Corp was absolutely, unequivocally over. The CEO finally slammed his hand, not his fist, but the flat of his hand, on the table. The sharp crack echoed through the room. "Enough," Mr. Henderson commanded, his voice shaking slightly. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "Brooke, you have proven your point. You are clearly under extreme duress. I respect the integrity of your actions, but I cannot condone the manner in which you executed them." He was giving me an out, a small corporate grace note to the chaos I had unleashed. I nodded slowly. I understood the language. He was acknowledging the truth while preserving his authority. I looked at my boss, who now looked less angry and more deeply concerned. "I'll be submitting my formal written resignation by 5 p.m. today, as I stated," I repeated. I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't expecting to stay. I had made my choice, self-respect over a corporate title. I picked up my briefcase, feeling suddenly lighter. The years of ambition, the striving, the pressure, it all fell away. I turned to walk out, passing the very seat Clara had occupied moments ago. Her coffee mug was still there, the lipstick stain on the rim a final, small, sensory detail of the life that was just brutally deleted. As I reached the door, Mr. Henderson called out, "Brooke." I paused, my hand on the handle. "You're a brilliant operator. But this was highly irregular." "Sir," I replied, turning back one last time, my eyes steady. "I was told I was paranoid by the person I loved most. I had to prove that I was right, and that the foundation of our life was a lie. If the only way to prove the truth in this company is with a public presentation on the main screen, then so be it. Have a good quarter." And with that, I opened the heavy door and walked out of the A-suite, leaving the horrified silence and the ruins of my marriage and career behind me. The chaos was over. Now came the cold, inevitable twist and resolution. Walking out of that boardroom, the A-suite, the supposed pinnacle of corporate success, felt less like a defeat and more like shedding a heavy, restrictive skin. The door closed behind me, muffling the stunned silence, but the reality of what I had done immediately set in. This wasn't just a breakup, it was a full-scale, career-detonating spectacle. I was now on the express elevator down, heading straight into the chaotic and inevitable Clara's breakdown and denial fails phase of this tragedy. I didn't head straight to my office. I went to the nearest deserted stairwell, pulled out my phone, and typed up the most concise resignation letter possible. Effective immediately, due to irreconcilable ethical conflict. I emailed it to HR and my boss simultaneously. There was no point in waiting. I had preemptively answered the question of my employment status. About 20 minutes later, I was back at my desk, quietly pulling personal items into a box, a framed photo of my parents, a ridiculous world's best M&A guy mug, a favorite pen. That's when Clara appeared. She didn't come in alone. She burst through the door, followed by Eleanor, the head of HR, who was trying desperately to maintain control. Clara was no longer the polished executive I'd married. Her makeup was smeared, her suit jacket was wrinkled, and her eyes were red and streaming with tears. The corporate mask was completely off, replaced by raw, desperate emotion. "How dare you, Brooke?" she screamed, her voice echoing in the nearly empty office space. My coworkers, sensing the drama, were retreating into their cubicles like scared turtles. "You are insane. You're a sociopath. You spied on me. You ruined my life. You broke the law." Eleanor, the HR executive, intervened, placing a restraining hand on Clara's arm. "Clara, please. You need to calm down. We can discuss the terms of your departure rationally." The word departure hit Clara like a physical blow. She realized the immediate gravity of the situation. She wasn't just suspended, she was fired. Her decade of striving, her professional identity, was gone. "Departure!" Clara shrieked, whirling to face Eleanor. "You're firing me because of my husband's hysterical fit? You're taking his side. He violated company policy. He publicly humiliated me. That man is a threat." Eleanor remained cool, a practiced corporate machine. "Clara, the voice messages you sent, which we heard, indicate not only professional distraction but also the misuse of company resources and time for activities outside the scope of your employment. Your actions, regardless of Brooke's extreme reaction, constitute gross professional misconduct. The decision is final. We need your security badge and company phone now." It was the ultimate denial fails moment. Clara was attempting to reframe the narrative, to make me the villain for exposing the truth, rather than her for the betrayal itself. She wanted to focus on the how I did it, not the what I exposed. But in the corporate world, the bottom line is, did you compromise the company? And in this case, the answer was yes, definitively. Clara turned back to me, her voice dropping to a desperate, manipulative plea, a final attempt to invoke the emotional connection she had so casually discarded. Brooke, please. We can fix this. We can tell them it was a prank. That we were role-playing. You can call Mr. Henderson. Tell them you were stressed. We're a team, remember? We have the mortgage. The apartment. Don't throw everything away over one stupid mistake. I stopped packing and finally looked at her, not with anger, but with a quiet, devastating finality. I picked up the mug that said, World's Best M&A Guy, and placed it in the box. It wasn't one mistake, Clara. It was months of calculated lying. It was laughing at me and calling me paranoid, I said, repeating the word she had used in Section 3 like a curse. You weren't role-playing when you told Leo you couldn't focus on the pitch because you were next to your husband. You were lying to me every day in our own kitchen, using corporate terms like team building as a sick joke. I walked over to my filing cabinet and pulled out an envelope. Inside were the documents for our pending apartment refinance, documents we were supposed to sign next week. I tossed the envelope onto her desk. Don't worry about the mortgage. You have 24 hours to move your personal belongings out of the apartment. I'll be staying with a friend, and I'm initiating divorce proceedings tomorrow morning. You wanted to choose Leo and your secrets over our life? You got it. You lost the job, you lost the apartment, and you lost the husband who gave you every chance to tell the truth privately. Her last flicker of professional control and emotional manipulation completely evaporated. She sunk into her chair, realizing the total extent of the damage she had wrought. The truth, delivered publicly on the A-suite screen, was now dismantling her entire reality, piece by calculated piece. Eleanor quickly pulled her away, promising to arrange for the supervised collection of her remaining items. I watched her go, not with triumph, but with an exhausting sense of finality. The only thing left was the twist and resolution of the immediate professional fallout. The immediate chaotic aftermath of Clara's departure from the office was a blur of silence and speed. Eleanor, the HR executive, was a machine, ensuring that within the hour, both Clara's and my access to the building was revoked. My resignation letter, which I had emailed with that concise, cold subject line, was accepted instantly. There was no negotiation, no exit interview, just a swift, clean cut. This was the career fallout and swift exit phase, the inevitable consequence of prioritizing truth over corporate politics. My boss, the head of M&A, stopped by my desk a few minutes after Clara was escorted out. He didn't look angry, he looked weary, like a man who had seen too many corporate betrayals. He was one of the executives who had been supportive of my promotion track, and I could tell this act was as much a disappointment to him as it was a professional loss for the department. Brooke, he stuttered, his voice a low rumble. What you did was dramatic. Professionally, it was a mistake. We could have managed this quietly. You were weeks away from director. You know that, right? I know, I admitted, zipping up the last box containing my desk relics. But I couldn't be managed quietly, sir. Not after being told I was paranoid for months while she was actively texting him on company time. That level of calculated deception felt like a disease I had to excise publicly. The cost of staying quiet was my self-respect. He sighed, running a hand over his face. Self-respect is a high price to pay in this building, Brooke. But I get it. Look, I'm putting a note in your file. Not about the drama, but about your integrity. I'm going to note that you resigned due to an irreconcilable ethical conflict, and that you chose to walk away rather than drag the firm through litigation. It won't get you a job at our competitors, but it won't blacklist you from the entire industry either. You have a lot of goodwill here, you just used it all up in one presentation. That was the twist of corporate fate I didn't expect. My radical transparency, my willingness to sacrifice my job for the truth, was being viewed by some, at least my boss, as a perverse form of integrity. I was a brilliant operator, as Mr. Henderson had called me in Section 9, and even my spectacular downfall was executed with a certain corporate decisiveness. I finished packing my few boxes. The irony of leaving the building with a cardboard box filled with trinkets, walking away from a life that had cost so much effort to build, was immense. The corporate summit where I had planned to impress the CEO with my M&A presentation had instead become the venue for my own personal and professional divorce announcement. The immediate fallout for Clara was even more severe. I later learned from a reliable source in legal that Leo, the coworker, was immediately placed on unpaid administrative leave pending a full investigation. His professional life was just as compromised as Clara's, if not more, since the voice messages clearly showed him misusing corporate resources and time. The X project that had supposedly necessitated all their team building and late nights was instantly shut down, deemed too compromised to continue. The company was trying to scrub the whole thing from history. But 40 executives had witnessed the show. 40 people knew the truth. Clara's denial fails in the office, where she tried to reframe me as unhinged, had done nothing to save her. She was now without a job, without a marriage, and facing the immediate reality of finding a new place to live, all within the span of a few hours. My own swift exit was quiet. I took the service elevator down, past the loading dock, avoiding the main lobby where I used to greet Clara with a quick kiss before catching my commuter train. I walked out into the city, carrying 2 small boxes, feeling the strange, contradictory sensation of total devastation mixed with absolute freedom. I didn't immediately move on with the divorce paperwork. That night, I drove to the apartment, not to stay, but to retrieve the rest of my essential documents and clothes. I found a note from Clara on the kitchen island, the same island where she'd been texting Leo with the espresso machine whirring in the background, a callback to the voice message in Section 9. The note was short, written quickly on a crumpled piece of our corporate memo pad. It didn't apologize for the affair. It didn't apologize for the lies. It only said, "You won, Brooke. You proved your point. But you lost everything, too. Was it worth it?" That question, was it worth it, hung in the air, a precursor to the final section's philosophical conclusion. I looked around the expensive, silent penthouse, the apartment that was the symbol of our shared ambition. I had walked away from the money, the job, and the woman I loved, all to prove one single, devastating point: I wasn't paranoid. I left the note exactly where it was. The victory was hollow, the cost immense. But I finally had peace, a profound relief that the lie was gone, replaced by a devastating, but honest, truth. The life I'd lived for 5 years was dead, but I was finally free to build a life based on something real. The final twist and resolution was waiting for me outside the walls of Global Synergy Corp. I stood there in the apartment for a long time, the note with Clara's final, bitter question, "Was it worth it?" staring back at me from the kitchen island. That question, the one she asked in the ruins of our life, was the core of the final twist and resolution. It was the philosophical knot I had to untangle as I began my new, incredibly uncertain life. The immediate professional consequences were real and brutal, exactly as anticipated in Section 11. I was unemployed. The lucrative career path, the one that had consumed my 20s, was abruptly over. I had to sell the apartment, a joint asset, which was a slow, painful process facilitated by lawyers who communicated only through formal, sterile emails. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, quiet and entirely without drama, because all the drama had already been consumed by the corporate boardroom. Clara had signed everything, too defeated and financially ruined to fight. The real twist, though, wasn't about the job or the money. It was about the lingering question of public revenge. Was it worth the financial cost to gain that moment of absolute, undeniable truth? When I finally started job hunting, things were tough. My former boss had kept his word, noting my resignation as an ethical conflict, but the whispers had traveled faster than any official HR memo. Everyone in the industry knew the story of Brooke and the Projector. I was a pariah, viewed as too volatile, too likely to air personal grievances on a massive corporate screen. It became clear that in the world of high finance, a quiet cheater is preferable to a brutally honest man who makes a scene. The corporate world valued silence over truth. I spent nearly a year bouncing between consulting gigs, trying to rebuild my reputation and my savings. It was a humiliating, humbling experience, a far cry from the $50,000 corporate bonuses I was used to. But in that time, away from the constant pressure of the corporate ladder, I found something invaluable: perspective. I realized that the life Clara and I built, the one she thought I had lost, wasn't actually my life. It was a gilded cage, an alliance fueled by mutual ambition rather than real connection. She had called me paranoid back in Section 3 as a defense mechanism, but her lie had forced me to rely on my intuition, the one thing I had learned to trust implicitly. The ultimate resolution wasn't the public exposure. It was the forced separation from the lie and the toxic environment that allowed it to thrive. The real twist came much later, about 2 years after the incident. I ran into my old boss at a conference I was covering as a freelance consultant. He looked surprised to see me, but he came over and shook my hand. He told me something fascinating. He said that after the boardroom incident, the corporate culture at Global Synergy Corp actually shifted. Mr. Henderson, the CEO, had been deeply unsettled by the entire affair. The sheer magnitude of the public revelation and the immediate resignation of 2 high-ranking employees forced a reckoning. The company introduced a mandatory, intense ethics and anti-harassment training program, not the usual rubber-stamp kind, but one that actually addressed transparency and accountability. "The place is different now, Brooke," my former boss admitted, leaning in conspiratorially. "There's less fear, less secrecy. Everyone remembers the projector screen silence. Your move, while devastating to your career, actually cleaned house. It exposed the rot and forced change. You became an unintentional corporate martyr." I had risked everything for personal truth, and in the process, had inadvertently become a catalyst for corporate integrity. I hadn't just exposed Clara, I had held a mirror up to the entire company's culture of pretense, reminding everyone that their actions, even the secret ones, had consequences. Clara and Leo. They lasted less than a year. The intensity of their secret affair couldn't survive the scrutiny of their public failure. Without the corporate stage and the thrill of the clandestine team building, their connection dissolved. I heard she eventually took a low-level job at a much smaller, non-profit organization in a different state, trading her power suit for a quiet, inconspicuous life. Leo was last seen trying to start a financial consulting firm that quickly failed. Their ambition, fueled by their betrayal, had consumed them. I never got the old life back, but I got a better one. I started my own small consulting firm, specializing in ethical practices and internal auditing, ironically, using the same fierce intuition that Clara had dismissed as paranoia. I met someone new, a woman outside the corporate sphere, who values openness and honesty above ambition and titles. So, was it worth it? The answer is a resounding yes. I lost the prestige, the money, and the marriage, but I gained my sanity, my self-respect, and the knowledge that I stood up for the truth when everyone else, including the woman I loved, expected me to stay silent for the sake of appearances. I chose reality over the illusion, and that's a victory no corporate title could ever match. The last laugh wasn't Clara's, it was mine. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this wild tale of corporate drama and public revenge, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more true stories about life's unexpected twists. And feel free to drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in that boardroom.